Hello everybody, and thanks for coming. My name is Barko Novakovic. I'm a program manager on database systems groups in Microsoft. And in database systems, we are building mainly relational database services, SQL Server on-premise, SQL Server in virtual machines, our fully managed database as a service in the cloud. The role of program manager is actually to be a customer advocate within the engineering team. So we are talking frequently to customers. We tend to understand their requirements and to translate these requirements into the real full functional specification of our services. I spent with Microsoft almost 8 years. I worked on several SQL Server releases, including 2016, which was one of the biggest one for me, where I work on temporal tables, JSON, and query store improvements. I hope that you guys are familiar with some of these. In today's session, we will talk about the new extension of our database as a service, Azure SQL database called Managed Instance. And basically, I'd like to give you product overview to explain what Managed Instance is, starting from the, let's say, the modernization opportunity aspect, and then going through a detailed product overview and characteristics, trying to focus a little bit more on the developer perspective. What does it mean for developer to work with Managed Instance? The large portion of my session today will be demo, and then finally, if time permits, I'll talk a little bit about business model, and we can also answer the questions that you have. Now, before going into the details, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions to understand the structure of the audience. First of all, how many of you have been directly working with the SQL Server in any form? Okay, that's great. SQL Server in Azure? Oh, that's a decent number. How many of you are mainly in the DBA role? Okay, not that many. How many of you are actually focusing on the database development? Okay, and any data or platform architect? Okay, so it's a mix, interesting mix. Okay, so let's start with the opportunity aspect, right? Why we are building Managed Instance? I'll try to quickly cover what you probably heard several times, but this is really a very specific moment in the technology history when technology really plays important role in shaping how company grow their businesses, how they innovate. So definitely important part of that is digital transformation. And as a reaction, company are building digital strategies that include several aspects, and one of these really important aspect is how to get to the cloud, because today being competitive, getting ahead really means getting to the cloud, and companies really tend to do that very fast. Now, more specifically to the businesses that are run on Microsoft stack and SQL Server for the data-driven and data-centric application, we've seen that actually this step towards clouds, meaning becoming more efficient, right, for the IT sectors and IT departments within companies. And that definitely has to do with some strategies that our customers define on that journey. And we've seen that customers who are running many applications today on SQL Server or planning to develop new application, they kind of getting this or proposing this approach for cloud migration. First of all, they focus on the, let's say, tail application tier 2, tier 3 application, and they try to massively migrate them to the cloud, and that way they actually eliminate time spent on managing these applications, which will definitely free up resources in these companies and give them more time to focus strongly on business critical application, to modernize them by moving in the cloud and extending there, right? So this is a kind of a playbook for many of these companies that we are working with. And then more specifically to SQL Server, what does it mean? 37% of database-centric applications run on SQL worldwide. So that's a huge opportunity, right, for the modernization. And then a huge portion of these applications actually run on an older version of SQL, not that recent. So if you combine those two, you'll see that worldwide, when it comes to modernizing SQL application, there is a lot of opportunity. Now, what should be the answer for customers who are considering cloud migration and modernization? That's definitely Azure SQL Database. It's by far the best and most economical cloud destination. Why? Because it's really a SQL Server that is run and operated by Microsoft. And then we invested a lot of time and effort and energy and innovation to actually make it always highly available for you, to provide the business continuity, and then to provide you with a level of performance that you expect. So a lot of built-in capabilities within Azure SQL Database are there to help you to actually let platform do management for you, and you focus on really what matters for the business. I'll name a couple of these, right? Like built-in high availability, automated backup, ability to restore any of your databases to any point in time in the past, right? And then disaster recovery topologies that you can create very easily, and other things, right? So those core services that exist in Azure SQL Database really help you be more productive. But then, besides the core services, there are other capabilities in Azure SQL Database, like built-in intelligence, which actually can help you reduce effort in optimizing performance and security, right? And then some other things like productivity and performance. Examples are ability to scale up, scale down your databases and instances. Use the in-memory OLTP technology for the most demanding applications and stuff like that. But the third pillar here on this slide is actually Azure SQL Database, as of this year, also allows you to migrate your existing application very seamlessly at a low cost. And that's actually where managed instance comes into play. Just to illustrate what Azure SQL Database is, it's a mature service. It's running millions of databases. It hosts petabytes of data, executes millions of queries every hour, right? And that's operated by Microsoft. So that's the family, which new member is Azure SQL Database Managed Instance. It's a third deployment option, or a third flavor of Azure SQL Database, which is specific compared to other two, which is specific in terms that it offers you instance-level programming interface. To put it very simply, in SQL Database, when you connect your application to the database, your executing context is a single database, right? Now, in instance, and then of course you have guaranteed level of performance and all of these automatic features, manageability out of box. When you connect to managed instance, you actually get instance level, or put it simply, SQL Server connection point. Very much same as you do with running SQL on premise, but the difference here is that SQL is not something that you need to manage. It's fully managed by the platform, right? And then we see that that's the reason why it's really best option for modernization of existing application with a low cost. Why? Because first, it's really close to SQL Server when it comes to the supported features, and second, it provides the best possible TCO. Now, one step further to click through that is what are the, at the lower level, what are the specifics of managed instance? What are the, let's say, pillars of how you can use it to achieve easy migration and modernization of your application. There are 4 different things that we want to emphasize during this presentation, and we'll show all of them. And first one is actually SQL Server compatibility. What does it mean? It means SQL Server is a mature product, 20 years around, a lot of features inside. And then if you compare Azure SQL Database prior to managed instance and SQL Server, our developers and our customers, they are finding gaps. Not all features are supported, right? So managed instance significantly reduces that gap. There are a lot of features coming out of the box in managed instance. And what does it mean for you? If you want to migrate and modernize existing application, that means that most likely you will just need to repoint your application from the on-premise to managed instance, and it will just work without any change. 0 development cost. So you can focus on later on modernization, right? If you are developing new application and you really want to use the full programmability stack of SQL, you need things like CLR, cross-database queries and transactions, you want to use link server, you want to use transactional replication, all of these things, then managed instance is again for you, right? So now the choice for the new application between SQL database, single database, elastic pools, and managed instance is really in terms of how rich is the feature set that you want to use in the database layer, right? The second aspect here is that I already emphasized. Managed instance is part of SQL database, which means that although it's fully fledged SQL, it's managed, and it's not infrastructure as a service. It's not a VM that you get just automatically provisioned for you. It's a highly available service that is operated and managed by Microsoft. And all database as a service features that you can find in the rest of the SQL database are already there in managed instance or will come as part of the managed instance roadmap. Managed instance, as of beginning of March, is in public preview, and we are working hard to make it available, generally available for everybody. And then as part of that journey, we are adding a couple of missing features, and we are improving the stability and quality of the product. The third pillar of managed instance is very, very unique to it, and it's about security. Basically, managed instance is a service that is running fully contained in your network, which means that all networking communication that exists there are under your control. You see them, you can control them, you can audit them, you can block if you don't like them, right? To put it very simply, managed instance is a database service that is accessible over private IP and not public IP, right? And then basically means that with managed instance, if you have need to build application with the highest possible level of security, if you need to meet strict security demand of your company or company for which you're developing, then you will definitely consider managed instance because of the virtual network integration. And of course, it is there to enable some very interesting scenarios, like hybrid scenarios. You have your instances of SQL running on-premise, you want to offload a couple of portion of these instances in the cloud, but you want to keep the connectivity through the private channel. This is something that you can achieve through managed instance because of this VNet integration and express route connectivity. And the fourth thing is actually about business model. And I'll talk about this, but the main thing here is that it's very easy and intuitive what are the inputs that you need to provide to create managed instance? What are the inputs that you can scale up and down? And what are the actually resources that you pay for? Okay. Now let's deep dive into all of these areas. So the goal of managed instance is actually to keep the compatibility with previous version of SQL starting from 2005 and up. And as I mentioned, basically the goal is to eliminate any app changes and help you use the tools and the drivers and the key coding practices that you have with SQL Server on-premise. So all of these stay with managed instance because of the highest possible compatibility. I listed here a couple of most important features that are available out of the box, and starting with a native restore. It's very unique that with managed instance you can take your database created anywhere and just restore in managed instance with a single command, right? So that way you can basically have copy of your system, which is exact 100% same as in your development environment or in your on-premise environment, and then also you can, that way you can migrate a huge portion of data, a huge amount of data, like hundreds of gigabytes and terabytes. And then for the developers, the thing that they are interested in the most is that cross-database queries and transactions are available, which means that if your application needs to use multiple databases, and that's often the case, very, very rarely application need to work with a single user or application database, then you need to have some easy methods to actually query across or to run transactions across these databases. So same way as you would do that on-premise, you can now do that with a managed instance. You can create multiple databases on the one managed instance and then query across. And then a lot of features, I'm here emphasizing always security because SQL Server is the most secure database in the world, and then we tend to keep that and augment that in Azure even further. So all these great security features that are important for your application and for the perhaps compliance are there. Starting from encrypting at rest, SQL audit, which helps you understand who access and what are the changes in the database, and then always encrypted, which helps you actually to have data encrypted in transit between your application and the database, dynamic data masking, and so on and so on. Now, features that also are very, very heavily and frequently used, lacking today in SQL database, now part of managed instance, starting with SQL agent. So basically, you can create different type of jobs. You can orchestrate any processing with SQL agent very easily. You can migrate existing jobs that you perhaps developed on-premise to the managed instance and just continue using them as you did. Database mail for any kind of a notification is also there. Now, features that we call scenario enablers, which means that very specifically use database features for certain customer scenario. We selected a couple of these and made them available in managed instance, starting from change data capture for data warehousing, analytics type of workloads, service broker for asynchronous notification between the database and application tiers. So basically, very efficient data communication. And then transactional replication for various scenarios, including the synchronizing multiple instances, offloading your reporting to another instance, migrating from one environment to another, and common language runtime. CLR, or common language runtime, is actually very well known, the extensibility method in SQL, which allows you to write code in .NET, deploy your assemblies in the engine, and run them in SQL, right? That way you have tight connection between your code and your data, and also it simplifies some deployment models that you can use, still preserving the knowledge and investments that your development crew have. Now, let's talk about some specific services. SQL Server is a very rich product. It runs several. It includes several services. Now, I'll be just here very straight and open. Managed instance doesn't include all of these services. Business intelligence services are not part of managed instance. Managed instance is actually database engine run as a service in the cloud. So what does it mean if you currently use or you plan to use BI services? What are the options for you? Luckily, for the integration and analysis services, there are platform as a service counterparts in Azure, which means that you can run cubes in tabular mode, and you can run integration services packages in ADF v2 runtime. And the great news is that you can integrate these services with managed instance very, very easily, very natively, very easily. And for the reporting purposes, of course, our strong recommendation is use Power BI. That's a new reporting service that we have. But if you want to keep reporting service, and if you want to use reporting services still, then for now, the only option is actually to keep reporting services within the virtual machine, connected to the managed instance, and use it as a data source. But this is actually how this modernization topology will look if you have multiple services along with the managed instance. Now, more specifically for these integration services, it's a very nice story, because when you design the solution in cloud, you can independently create your integration services environment and manage the instance environment. You can provision them like very easily through Azure Portal or PowerShell or REST API or .NET. And then they have very native integration. So basically, scenario when you have your packages developed in for SSIS, you can deploy those packages in managed instance. So the database part is automatically managed. And you can use agent to schedule the job execution. And what happens, thanks to the integration between managed instance and SSIS service, basically packages are hosted in managed instance but executed from the SSIS runtime. So, and then of course all reviewing results and seeing the status of the execution is again there and incorporated. So this presentation contains some useful link you can explore to learn more about integration services in the cloud, and also the way how you can integrate with the managed instance. The great thing is that both managed instance and SSIS paths are there to first give you a lot of existing development opportunities, but also to provide you full lift and shift for the existing solution. So the great thing about SSIS is that not only that you can use Microsoft components, but you can also use third-party components and even custom components to run within the SSIS, which means that you can further extend, as a developers, you can extend the SSIS by developing your custom code. Now, the next important point is that managed instance is also integrated with other Azure services. And if you think about migration of the database, if that's the main case because of the modernization, then you don't need to do that manually. You don't need to script out the procedure for migrating databases and switching the application from on-premises to the cloud. You can use Azure Database Migration Service. How many of you have heard about DMS or, okay, so that's large number of people. So basically, data migration service is there to help you with the easy and seamless migration at scale, and also includes the minimal downtime option. What does it mean? Basically, it encapsulates all of the migration logic for you, regardless of which source and destination you are using. And then basically with the minimal downtime, it allows you to control the failover point in time when you run your application. When you stop running application in one environment, let's say on-premise or in the virtual machine, and you start running that application against the database that is hosted in managed instance. With the DMS, it's possible to achieve, it will be possible to achieve really minimal downtimes, less than a few minutes. So before we go to next section, maybe we can take a few questions. Yeah?
Is there any integration with site recovery, or what happens if a region fails over or you want to deploy architecture?
Yes, yes. Actually, that's on my next slide. Yeah.
Does DMS have any database size limitations?
Not that I'm aware of, but managed instance. If you think about managed instance specifically as the destination environment, it has limitation today in preview 8 terabytes per instance and 8 terabytes per individual database. Yeah.
Does management support in-memory tables?
So the question is, does managed instance supports in-memory tables? The answer is yes. There are 2 service tiers that are actually containing that support. So let me do the following. I'll continue with the session because I believe that many of the questions you might have are already covered, and then go to the demo, and then hopefully we'll have at least 10 minutes for the Q&A. So let me quickly summarize these capabilities that are there in the managed instance that help you basically run the highly available and scalable application. So first of all, when you start, and you'll see that in the demo, it's very easy to create new managed instance, to drop the instance, to resize the instance. It's just a few clicks on Azure portal or a few lines of code through PowerShell, right? So like operating and controlling the lifetime is very easy. And then what you get free, definitely, is all patches and all upgrades come just free of charge for you. It's taken care of by Microsoft, and you just get the most secure, the most stable version pretty much every month. And that includes operating system and SQL Server patches and upgrades. Now, I mentioned already the automatic backups. So the system is such that you just control how long you want to keep your backups. It can be like 7 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month or something. And then basically system is taking care that all the backups there, so that any database at a database level, you can go and restore back using the, again, very simple mechanisms. Now, built-in high availability 4 nines provided by managed instance. That practically means that managed instance is running always on availability group behind the scenes. So you click to create managed instance, and we provision highly available cluster for you, right? And basically, if primary node goes down, the secondary automatically takes over your application, practically doesn't notice the downtime. We'll talk about the details, but that's the thing. So basically, if you compare if you think about how this increases the productivity, you just try to create or configure always on availability group, and you see how that easy is, right? Same way across the region. So built-in high availability protects you, gives you the high availability within the region. Across the region, basically you can have a disaster recovery solution based on active geo-replication that we have. And for you, it's just a matter of a few clicks or a couple of API calls from the PowerShell. You have your primary managed instance sitting in one region. You create managed instance in another region. With a few clicks, you establish the replication link, and that's all, right? So asynchronous always-on replication is happening behind the scenes, and then you can control whether you wanna, in case of a region failure, you can choose whether you wanna manually fail over, or you can let system to automatically fail over, and you have some knobs to control the failover policy. But that's like super easy, and again, productivity boost. Of course, another pattern for you is that with this, you can create globally distributed application, because SQL database and managed instance will follow that availability is available around 40 regions in the world. So imagine that if you want to have globally distributed application, or if your customer has that demand, you can actually achieve that only with a Azure SQL database. Again, with a very simple procedure. And then, thanks to the sharing the same architecture and the deployment patterns, basically managed instance inherits all of the security compliance. So basically means that your database platform is already compliant with, I think, around 40 different standards, and that gives you a lot of, basically that reduces your effort to make the platform compliant, right? And then I'll just name a few other more important services like threat detection. So you can easily configure threat detection for your instance, and then threat detection system will detect any malicious attack like DOS or SQL injection or some others, and report you with actually actionable insights, what you can do about it, right? So to protect your database. That's 24/7 protection for your database. And then on the roadmap is not yet available, but coming for the managed instance also ability to monitor, troubleshoot, and tune your workloads running in the database. What we call automatic tuning is coming to SQL database. That includes basically query plan automatic tuning is already available. I'm here referring to something that people know like automatic indexing and index recommendation. So that will be also available with managed instance. So basically a lot of built-in capabilities coming there to just focus on the business and platform to let platform to manage your databases. Now let's talk about the virtual network integration and security. So this is kind of a more explanation to what I already mentioned, is that your instances are deployed and connected to your virtual network at the networking level, right? And then basically means they are fully contained, and the traffic that is going from your network into your network is fully under your control. So basically you can apply different network security rules to protect your endpoint, and you can control precisely who is connecting and how. Today, managed instance even doesn't have public endpoint enabled, which means that if you deploy managed instance, and if you just create a couple of databases there or deploy your application, nobody will able even to connect to that, right? You need to take extra step to enable the connectivity. Public endpoint is coming as optional, and mainly there will be there for easy testing and you know Q&A and the development things. But basically the feedback that we are getting from customers, they like very much the fact that is isolated, that is protected at the networking level. As I already mentioned, both scenarios when you have your web application running in the cloud or your application running on premise, those applications will talk to managed instance through a private channel, and that's extremely unique. So if you think about multi-layer application, you can easily open up your front end to the internet, and then your basically database is really in the back end, visible only to your application and not others, right? Now, I want to spend some time talking about what I call developer perspective, which is actually what you need to know when you start working with managed instance. What are the important information? So you definitely need to use latest drivers that we have for SQL Server of any kind, because managed instance is actually, it's a new member of family. It has a way to uniquely identify itself. So all drivers need to know that they actually talk to managed instance and not to do something else. And then also when you connect to managed instance, as I already mentioned, it's interesting when you test your application to embrace the fact that it's running inside a virtual network. So you definitely need to have connectivity precisely controlled and established to managed instance. This is comparable to, SQL is running, firewall is on, and you have hard time to connect to SQL because it's protected, right? In the same way here with the managed instance, so it's really protected you, so you need to think about it in your testing and deployment scenarios. And as I said, public endpoint is definitely coming, so you will be able to turn it on and then control the access from the public internet. Now, managed instance is platform as a service, which means there is a high availability built in, but there can be some transient errors happening behind the scenes. So our recommendation is you can use latest drivers, and you can use some parameters to control how much your application is resilient to this temporary failures so basically, what does it do for you? It actually includes the retry logic in your application, and then if a request fail, the application itself will repeat the request, and then from the user point of view, it will be just like a query that was executing maybe a second longer or 2 seconds longer, but basically no downtime, no crash, no issue for your application. So building connectivity resilience is extremely important. And then just feel free to continue using the tools that you are familiar with, like Management Studio, definitely. So you can go on Management Studio is really adjusted to manage the instance, and it recognizes that it works with the managed instance and properly renders all of the objects. But you can also use SSDT and Visual Studio plugins to deploy the schema, sync the schema between your deployment and destination environment, and stuff like that. So all great things about deploying schema from the development to production or to test environment is there. Now, another thing that you should know about managed instance as a developer is that it's really running the latest, greatest, and most stable version of SQL. And what does it mean? It means that it's actually newer than what is commercially available on premises. So for instance, today is 17, right? But managed instance is actually newer than 17. It's something that you'll see on premises a few months from now, or a year now, or 18 months from now. So the way how we run our database service is actually, it's very unique. We are a cloud-first company, and everything that we develop for SQL, we are deploying first in Azure. So we built strong mechanisms to protect our 5 million databases from being interrupted or impacted by the new bits, right? So basically, practically every month, we are releasing new SQL engine version, and existing application in the cloud, they just don't see that as issue. And what is the key catch here is that when you run your application, you should stick to not to the SQL engine version, but rather to the database compatibility level. Database compatibility level defines how engine will work and how will interpret a feature that was introduced in SQL, right? So, and then it also affects the execution plans and other things. But here is the illustration. Managed instance Azure SQL database is latest SQL, but it allows you to use compatibility levels from 100 to 140. 100 is actually same as you would be running SQL Server 2008. So basically, within a box of latest SQL, you have behavior of SQL Server 2008, and that's a great thing. So, and then when you test and develop your application against the database compatibility, then doesn't matter if you run the previous or latest version of SQL, but actually that gives you some additional advantages. You are exposed to the really cutting edge technology that we produce, which means, okay, you're running your application on 100. Actually, for legacy features, your managed instance behaves as 2008, but you have ability to improve and modernize your application by taking new features. And I just put a couple of examples like temporal and JSON and graph database. All of these new features are just there, and you can start immediately using. Compare that with running your application on 2008. Unless you go to the latest SQL, which is basically happening not that often, you cannot modernize your application. So this is really great capability. Now, managed instance definitely with a set of features really behaves as a SQL on premises, but if you need for any reason to distinguish and actually inform your application that is running against managed instance, then use server property engine addition equals 8. That's the condition, basically. That's how managed instance identify itself uniquely, right? And then, as a developer, you should be aware of a couple of temporary limitations that we are going to remove very soon. One of these is that currently in public preview, any daytime function actually returns UTC, and there is no way for you to say, hey, I want to run my managed instance in EUS, in East US, or in any region or any time zone, unfortunately. But that is coming. In the meantime, if you're starting development with managed instance, you can use built-in add time zone function to actually convert UTC to any time zone, and add time zone function honors the daylight saving changes and all of these things that are coming as part of the update that we roll out. So basically, when you start using a time zone, you just don't care anymore about that. Now, as I said, ability for you to specify time zone at the instance level, it's coming. It's not yet there. And then the second thing that you should be aware of when you develop against managed instance is that currently instance collation is fixed, which means we do not allow you to specify instance level collation. What does it affect? It affects metadata, and also it affects TempDB. So basically, if your application is heavily using queries with the TempDB, creating temporary objects and then joining between the persistent objects, then you might experience the collation conflicts. So the current workaround is, during the development process, put the collation resolution directly in the code. And as I said, we are working on improvement which will allow you to, during the instance creation, to specify, I want all the collations for TempDB and system databases to be in a certain collation, right? And then it pretty much reflects the same behavior as on premises. I'll just roll this slide. So just a second. So this is about the database compatibility certification. This is expansion of our suggestion. Test your application for the database compat level, not for the exact version. We in Microsoft, we are running some program that include ISVs, and basically we are changing the approach and helping helping different ISVs and partners to embrace this database compatibility approach. So what is essentially it is about? It is the process for any ISV or any developer who wanna start with managed instance and maybe migrate existing code to managed instance is that before going to managed instance, you run the tools that we have, Database Migration Assistant, and then that tool will perform the detailed assessment of your code and basically inform you whether you have any breaking change, anything that is not going to work if you run it on managed instance, very transparently. If your tool is clean, if the result of tool is clean, then basically you can just say, hey, for this compat level, my code is running safely. I'm just going to deploy and run and without any concern, right? And of course, some minimal testing is always necessary, right? But not to the extent of, testing migration from one version to completely another. So it's really some basic testing. So the process itself is there to reduce this effort that everybody needs to invest when move to managed instances. And then at the same time, Microsoft actually will be working and making sure that if you have any issue with this approach, we'll fix it with the highest urgency. I'll again remind you, we are running this service with more than 4 million databases, and if we basically introduced any significant regression or problem for existing customers, we would be out of business, definitely. So basically, first of all, we are doing all necessary and testing work in-house to make sure that this approach is working. But the good the story for ISVs and any other developer is that just stick to the compute level that you think it's optimal for you, and then go to manage the instance without any problems. And of course, people are asking, okay, manage the instance, close to SQL Server, almost everything is there. What is missing? Is there any caveat, right? Is there any like small print thingy, right? And this slide is about this, right? So not all of the features are natively supported there, but for majority of the features that we didn't support, basically there is no need. We still don't see the need. If you think about creating always-on availability groups, no need, because as I explained, we do that for you. No need for high availability, no need for disaster recovery, but because there are other features available that you can use. And Windows authentication is basically like native Windows authentication is not supported, because we see that Azure Active Directory is alternative that everybody should be exploring, because Azure Active Directory is a future of identity services in Azure, and managed instance provides the native integration. So basically, still you can, thanks to the synchronization between the on-premise AD and Azure AD, you can still achieve the single sign-on experience with the managed instance. You can log into the managed instance, or your application can log using the domain, your domain credential, and that's supported. And then some features like database mirroring is definitely not necessary because of the HA and geo-replication. Now, extended store procedures, like how many of you actually have deployed extended store procedures that you developed in SQL? Okay, cool. So basically, that's great. We said for a long time that people should be using CLR. That's an extendability method. Extended store procedures are basically on the deprecation path, so we didn't consider enabling them, and basically it was a right choice. And there is a list of features that we know that people are using. We know that. But basically, implementing those features just requires some time. And given that this is a service, and with the GA, things just do not stop. We will developing and improving service constantly. Some of these features are on the post-GA list. The biggest ones are the file stream and file table. You still don't support them. If you have strong need, and you cannot replace that with var binary or any other alternative, then SQL on premises or virtual machine is the option. And then cross-database distributed transactions across multiple instances or across heterogeneous resource providers, right? Like between SQL and some other services. So that's a very complex scenario, and definitely we wanna tackle that one. But it's not coming in next 4 to 6 months, right? So if your application has strong dependency on MSDTC and always uses MSDTC to run the cross-instance transactions, or then still managed instance is not a good option. And then some very features specific for features that are specific for certain scenarios. Search database, polybase are yet to be implemented, right? But the list is not too long, and on one of the previous slides, you can find the full comparison between what is available in SQL versus what is available in managed instance. And the good thing is that I mentioned collation and local time, and some other things will come very soon. And then the last thing that you should know if you use managed instances, that definitely there is opportunity for you to modernize your BI and analytics solution by embracing other services that are well integrated with managed instance, SSIS, SSAS, Power BI. But there are some other interesting capabilities that you can leverage here once you are on managed instance. One of the interesting is you can actually have your ability to offload your read-only queries to read-only replicas. So as I mentioned, managed instance actually has One of the service tiers in managed instance has multiple replicas, and one of these is available for your read-only workload. So if you just in the connection string specify read-only application intent, the query will be rerouted to this secondary replica, and basically that allows you that for to have doubled bandwidth and number of transactions that you can run for read-only workloads, right? Free of charge. And also you can use the same capability if you have GeoDR. Yes?
How many secondaries can you offer?
So local secondary is currently just one. Yeah, one local secondary. Yeah. But the same capability exists if you have GeoDR, and then secondary site you can use for the read-only workloads. It's also interesting if you have pattern when you have one active and multiple slaves distributed around the globe. So you can have one central that is constantly being updated, and then data being pushed to the regions, and then you have read-only workloads reporting or something running in the regions. Excellent for having close to customer database running in the region solution. And then, like another thing to have in mind when it comes to modernization, now you can build in your instance lifecycle logic in your code, and you can size your instance resources appropriately to your needs. What does it mean? You can actually start. You can run from your code either PowerShell or .NET. You can run the code that dynamically creates instance, or drop instance when you don't need it, or resize instance. For instance, there is a scenario when people over the weekend they don't need to run. There is no peak of the workload. It's very silent, and then over the weekend you can scale down your instance, and then during the working days you can scale it up, and then basically that's a cloud economy thing, right? You can run your workload in the most optimal way. That's something that you cannot do running the virtual machines or on-premise solutions. And then of course, whatever you do, focus on your application logic, and platform will do the rest for you. Now let's show the demo. Let's see a managed instance in action. I'll switch to my secondary screen. I need a few minutes or a few seconds to connect. To prepare that for you. So I think it should be number 5, or no, number 7. Okay, so what you see here is actually Azure portal, and I created a couple of resources for this demo. The resources include one pre-created managed instance, storage account that we will use for the database migration, virtual machine that is used for 2 purposes. To have secure connectivity to your managed instances, also to mimic the source SQL Server, and then you'll see some others as well. But let's first see what does it mean to create managed instance, right? How I can create managed instance. So basically, managed instance you can find in all resources. You can just click, say, hey, I wanna create one of my managed instance, and let me do something. I'll just take a couple of parameters, not to invent. So there is a name, and say demo user, and I'll intentionally use this password because it will be easier for me later on to connect and to save some time. So yeah, you create admin password, like this is a sysadmin password, and then you can specify resource group you're gonna use for this, I'll use this one for a specific reason, and then there is a region. Okay, so managed instances are located in a region, and you specify the region. For this session, we can create only West US, but basically you have all available regions here. And then the very specific thing is you need to specify virtual network. It needs to be pre-created where you want to place your managed instance, right? So how many of you are familiar with virtual networks? Great. So you know what I'm talking about. So the subnet for the managed instance needs to be dedicated. So no resources inside of that subnet, but luckily you can partition your virtual network to have multiple subnets, so you can create very interesting topologies. So I'm actually specify this, and let me show you this new business model. So there are a few things that you can select in service tier. One is the hardware generation. Currently, for me, is available only Gen 4. The specification of hardware generation are available publicly. And then you can specify how many cores and how much of the storage space you want to have using these sliders. And this portal actually calculates the cost for you. So that's a monthly cost. Yes? So depending on the service tier, I'll explain that later. So there are two service tier, general purpose and business critical. General purpose is using Azure Premium remote storage, and business critical is using local fast SSDs. So one of the differentiation points between those two is actually I/O performance. But there are some others, and hopefully I'll come to that. So with the storage, you say, hey, how much of the storage I need for this instance? What is the size of the disk that I'm going to provision? And then, say money option, it's interesting. If you have your license on premises with the license mobility, you can say, hey, I have license. What does it mean? It means that you can trade your license on premise for getting a discounted price in cloud up to 30 or even more %, which is really significant. But what is really great here is that during the 6 months, you have dual rights for using this license. You can use it both on premise and in the cloud, and this 6 months is actually a period for you to perform migration, right? But this actually significantly reduces the cost here, and then so for yes, so both standard and enterprise with a license mobility, so with software assurance are eligible. Now, standard will allow you to go only to take the general purpose service tier, whereas enterprise allows you to buy both, right? And then, yeah, I'll have a slide and it's contained in this presentation, right? So you'll see it. And then, here's the thing. I just say, hey, click create, pin to the dashboard, and that's all. I hope it's fine, the VNet is good, and then I just issue creation, and hopefully after it validates my inputs, and after should be like few minutes, 2 minutes, you have your instance running. Yes?
So you pick the cores and the storage.
Yeah.
So
memory is actually memory is something that you cannot choose with the current version. Depending on hardware generation, you have 7 gigabytes per vCore in Gen 4, and you have 5.6 gigabytes per vCore in Gen 5. But as I said, specifications are available in the documentation. So while it's running, while this guy is running, actually I wanted to show you the structure of the demo. So as you can see on this screen, what we have here, we have one huge virtual network. We have one subnet dedicated for this managed instance where we are deploying. We have one and we will deploy another one. We have a virtual machine that is actually sitting inside of the same virtual network, which means it's enabled to access this managed instance, right? So this virtual machine sitting in the same private network can access to this managed instance. And there is also DMS deployed in this. And as part of this demo, what I'm now doing, I'm creating MI from the portal. yes? And then I'll also do a few other things. I'll show you how you can take your simple application, migrate your databases through backup restore path, and run your application in the cloud. And then the third thing is that I'm going to run the DMS migration and show you how you can easily migrate at scale, very using the highly available service in the cloud, right? And then what is important here is that Azure Storage that we deployed is used as a connectivity point between the SQL running on the virtual machine and between managed instance, because in order to be able to restore in managed instance, that backup needs to be placed on the remote storage. So this is the structure of my demo, and I hopefully. Okay, so my deployment succeeded in 2 minutes. This is great. I have my instance up and running. My 8-core instance with more than 1 terabyte is running in the cloud after 2 minutes. That's really awesome. Now, what I wanted to show you here is that this is my VM. I had logged into this VM, and I logged in because it has public endpoint, and from this VM I can connect to my managed instance. And also I can migrate application, a simple application running on this virtual machine. Let me run the application to show you what it is. So it's application that is currently connected to my SQL on-premise or my demo VM. And if I run it, it will start doing something, showing some results like, online transaction report. It's a very ugly application. It's legacy application that I don't have source code for it, right? So I have no choice rather than just hope that it will run on managed instance, right? So.
Is it only reading or is it also writing?
Sorry?
Is it read only or is it also writing data?
Okay, this application is read only, but doesn't matter. We could have it in. I'll show the code behind the scenes. So this application is running, and that's fine. I can pause it, take the backups of the databases, and restore it again. Restore it and run application again. So what I'm doing now, actually, I'll run this script, which is a kind of a template script. And what I'm doing here is actually I'm creating credential that both my SQL on the VM and my managed instance will use to safely connect to the storage, because storage is a connection point. VM deploys backups there, managed instance pulls backups from the Azure storage. So to run this, I need 2 parameters. I need the URL of this storage account, and I need the SAS key. And I wouldn't go into the details, but it's very easy. You go to the portal, you click on the storage account, you create the SAS key, and then when you have SAS key, basically you need two parameters. You need the URL. I will run this template. I will just replace this, and I will specify the SAS key. Okay, let me see. This script is running on virtual machine. So my on-prem SQL is now able to reach to cloud, and I'll also change connection and run it against this managed instance that I had created, and again create SAS key there, right? So I performed the first step. The second step would be, hey, I'll actually back up all of my databases. Just make sure that I'm running this on the virtual machine. I'll back up all of my databases to Azure Storage. that should be fast. Sorry. Again, this is a template script. I'll just do, in order to preserve this template, I don't want to override it. So I'll just create a new file.
Is this a file share? File sharing back?
Yes, I'm backing up to. It's actually not file share. It's Azure Blob Storage. It's Azure Blob Storage. This is the guy that I'm using. So I created storage here in a certain region, and the only thing I need to know is its URL and SAS key. So when I run this script against my local SQL, what it's gonna do? It will just back up all databases, a couple of databases immediately to this storage account. And okay, next step is to restore these databases on managed instance. So I'm gonna again create template script. It's using templates because I didn't wanna hard code any parameter. By the way, this is also used by the lab tomorrow. So if you're interested, you can come tomorrow to my lab, and it will be 2 sessions, 75 minutes. So you'll be able to do various things, to create managed instance, to connect to DMS, to play with this demo in more details. So I need to make sure that I executing this against managed instance. So my managed instance here, you can see it, have 0 databases, and I'm run the script to restore these databases. Unique, extremely unique to managed instance is this restore capability. It'll take some time to restore. The restore takes more time because every of these databases is being assigned to a high availability group automatically. So upon creation, your database is highly available, and your instance is highly available. So in case of any issue, your instance failovers to spare replica. While it's executing, let me execute one of the scripts that I have here. This is a script I call typically managed instance introduce yourself. So there are a couple of built-in functions that we created specific for. We just created overrides for managed instance. Those are the well-known functions, server name and others. So you see server name is fully connectable name that contains the short instance name and then the full DNS, fully qualified DNS name for the managed instance. And then what managed instance says, it's really Microsoft Azure, the version, right? Like the rest of SQL Azure. It's edition Azure, and as I said, it has edition 8. So you know that you are working with the managed instance, but you have this. And this Microsoft major version tells you that is actually running version 15. So we can actually calculate easily 13 is 2016, 14 is 2017, and this is something even newer, right? So latest and greatest running in managed instance. Right. So you can use this script and similar script to code against the to actually use the metadata and build in the logic within your code. It'll probably take a minute or two to restore these databases in managed instance. So while it's working, let me use a few minutes to show you what are the options available out of the box. Oh, so no, this is managed databases. I wanted to use managed instance. So the instance that we created, you can easily get the. So first overview, you have the very basic information about the region, the pricing tier, the VNet and subnet, subscription and other things. You can easily get the connection string in all of these drivers. You can copy them from the portal, right? And there are some interesting things. You can here reset password for your sysadmin. Basically, person who has Azure permissions can do that. And then you can set up the Azure Active Directory authentication, or you can use the threat detection as advanced service. But what is also very interesting, you can just say, hey, my managed instance needs to be bigger. Let me increase it to 16 cores and change the storage and apply. And now let's see how long it will take to actually change this. By the way, while this operation is being executing, this instance is available for your application. There is only small glitch in the last step of this upgrade when actually failover happens to the newly created instance. But during this process, although it's running maybe a few minutes, application doesn't see the connectivity problems. So I restore my databases, and as you can see, first they're all here. 3 databases, and as I said, by default I kept the original compatibility level 110, which guarantees me that if I have dependency on the features running on this compat level, that will just work with the managed instance, right? I can later on decide to increase the compat level, but that's up to me as a user, right? And then, okay, so let me quickly run this. My application, I will change and say, hey, now you need to use this new instance within the databases, and I will resume. Oh, it says .NET Framework is not enabled. Does it mean that it's not available in managed instance? No, it just means it's not by default enabled, and we'll just enable it in a second. So I can go connect to my managed instance and basically do these SP configure. So just know that SP configure is available for you, so you can play with it. And why is that so? Because one of the databases deployed in this managed instance, you see it has CLR, UFDS, assembly, and a couple of functions. So this application is leveraging these. So, okay, now I enable CLR, and basically my application is running against managed instance without any change. Now what is also beautiful, if I want, I can go and run profiler here. Let me use the password because I always forget and I cannot type it. So I can use profiler, connect to my managed instance to see actually, I think it's, I can filter by application name, not organized, but column filters. And when I run profiler, it's interesting. So it connects to managed instance, and you see it actually goes and say, hey, those are the stored procedures. Get SP user transaction, get country by transaction summary. So it's read only, okay? But I can go to these procedures, and I can go to these procedures that are located in this database on the managed instance. And let me show you. So this one is actually using CLR, and this one is using cross-database queries between multiple databases, so it just works out of the box. And this one is using another feature that is really unique to the instance. Those are the global temp tables, so not the local one, but the global that exist until there is a connectivity that is used. So very, very common pattern, right? So basically, I can go further, and I could create link server and maybe change my application so that one database is on-premise and 2 databases in the cloud, and it will work because link server just works. So this is really beautiful. But I would stop here because we are approaching to the end of this session. The last thing that I want to show, okay, this guy is about to complete. It typically uses 4 to 5 minutes, but as a last step, actually, I can show the last thing is, yes, managed instance comes with an instance of agent that is also highly available and automatically deployed. So I can just quickly execute this script, and it will create job, and I can run my job against managed instance, and this job is doing some table rebuild and stuff like that. I can further go and then configure the database email notification or whatever, right? So basically, as you can see here, the full stack is available, and that really is a guarantee for you that any application you have or any development pattern you have is something that you can easily support. We didn't have time to go to this. It's in the session. It's in the slide deck. I just wanted to show the list of resources that you can explore further about the managed instance, and I invite you to come tomorrow to the lab. Again, there are 2 sessions with a lot of opportunity to play it with managed instances yourself and learn about it. So yeah, thank you very much. Yes, question?
One of the early slides mentioned SQL 2005 compatibility, and then I think you mentioned 2008.
So yeah, that's a good catch. So basically, we do support direct migration and database restore from 2005, but the database compat level is 100 is the lowest one. So what happens when you restore 2005? You get 100 compat level, but that's the same behavior with SQL on-premise. We don't support 90 compat level in SQL anymore. Yeah. Yes. The link server towards any SQL destination running either on premises or in the cloud is possible. What is not yet available is link server towards Oracle, but we have it on the roadmap and we want to support it. But basically, in any environment, fully cloud, hybrid, you can run link server queries. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in the fall, yeah. Not yet. In database analytics is not yet. Yes, it's on the roadmap. I cannot tell you, like, it's definitely not for 6 months, but it's on a little bit longer roadmap. Yeah.
When will the preview go really publicly available?
So you mean the GA question that lady had?
No, not the GA. Like right now, the preview is you have to be accepted.
Yes,
and
it's.
One of my subscriptions we got accepted, but the one that we really wanted to test it on because it didn't get accepted.
So here's the thing. If you want to test, it's just a matter of prioritization. So it'll take us maybe 2-3 months to open it fully.
Okay.
But feel free to reach out to me directly. Do not hesitate. Just send me an email with the details, and that's fine. We have opportunity to onboard you. So for everybody who actually wants to use managed instance, the preview is still controlled, which means gated. But just if you plan to start immediately, use my contact from the presentation, and we will make it for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Notification services is actually supported.
Really?
Yeah, service broker and notification services are supported. Yeah, which actually allows very interesting application patterns, right? Yeah.
Can you mirror into managed instance for migration purposes, or do you have to use DMS?
So for the minimal downtime, right?
Well, so migrating a large database, right?
So the DMS is one of the options. Another one would be transactional replication, mirroring directly or always on directly is not, unfortunately, supported yet.
Even on the same version, on the same compatibility level?
No, not yet. So we are considering, but it's substantial engineering work.